Good evening and welcome to tonight's Fairfax County Democratic Committee National Affairs Forum, Trump Unhinged. I'm Sandra Clausen, the forum moderator and FCDC National Affairs Committee Chair. Our forums examine matters of national importance for the purpose of informing, engaging, and inspiring Democrats to action. I want to recognize and thank those who contribute to organizing and promoting this forum, including my National Affairs Committee colleagues, Abby Block, Ernie Kreider, Stephen Hall, Paul Jameson, Ray Marin, Michelle Menapace, Paul Norsey, Andy Scalise, and Lisa Singer. I also want to thank Ben Zuhl, a Fairfax Public Access Director, for preparing the debate video clips, our FCDC Executive Director, Jack Corrali, and a Canadian cartoonist, Michael Deatter, who generously granted permission to use his cartoon, Trump Unhinged, as our promotional graphic. And finally, our two co-sponsors, the Fairfax Young Democrats and the Orange County, Virginia Democratic Committee. I also want to recognize and thank Lauren Hershey, who contributed quite a lot to FCDC through this forum, enough to be on the host committee. So we thank Lauren very much. Now I'm going to explain how our program will proceed after my introduction. Our two speakers will each make their presentation. During each presentation, you're encouraged to write your questions for the respective speaker in the webinar Q&A box. Not the chat box. We will only be monitoring the Q&A box. At the conclusion of each speaker's remarks, I'll ask our National Affairs Committee member and secretary, Michelle Menapace, to read your questions to the speaker. After both speakers have concluded their comments and answered participants' questions, Dr. Frank and Colonel Wilkerson will engage each other in a brief discussion as the final segment of the forum. I want to let you know ahead of time, we may run over the published forum time. We have a lot of substance to get through. And if we do, we understand if some of you have to leave, but hope you can stay with us throughout. Let's begin. Donald Trump is a destroyer. In his few years in office, which seem like a century to all of us, his actions and policies have severely damaged our government, our democracy, and the lives of millions. Examples include his COVID-19 malfeasance, contributing to the death of over 212,000 Americans and the worst economy since the Great Depression, while all the while he's endeavoring to weaken and overturn the Affordable Care Act when Americans need health care the most. Next, another one, his systematic assaults on the rule of law, his fomenting of racism, prejudice, hatred, and division, his reshaping of the tax code to benefit millionaires and starve the social safety net, his denigration of the contributions of our veterans, intelligence personnel, and other career government workers, his weakening or eliminating regulations that protect Americans' air, water, food, and environment, his caging of immigrant children in inhumane conditions, and cruel reshaping of immigrant and refugee policies, his endangering our national security by eviscerating our alliances, our standing influence and power in the world, and pandering to right-wing dictators and autocrats, his relentless attack on the free media, his denial and replacement of science, knowledge, professionalism with ignorance, dishonesty, misinformation, and amateurism, his work to suppress the vote of all who oppress him, and his signaled intent to subvert the 2020 election. Trump is a clear and present danger to the United States and the world, and our speakers tonight will address this danger. Dr. Justin A. Frank is a former clinical professor of psychiatry at the George Washington University Medical Center and a physician with more than 40 years of experience in psychoanalysis. He is a frequent contributor to HuffingtonPost.com and has served as a columnist for Time Incorporated, DailyBeast.com, and Salon.com. Dr. Frank is the best-selling author of Trump on the Couch, Inside the Mind of the President, Bush on the Couch, and Obama on the Couch. He also appears in the recently released documentary, Unfit, that details why Trump must not be reelected. I want you to please welcome Dr. Frank, and remember to write your questions for him in the Q&A box. Over to you, Dr. Frank.
Thank you for that generous introduction, Sandra, and I'm happy to be here for this forum. And what I thought I would do for tonight is, since the main thing we're going to do is look at some clips from the first debate between President Trump and former Vice President Biden, I thought I'd give a few summary comments about the book. I can show you the cover of it here. And there it is, Trump on the Couch, Inside the Mind of the President. It's actually got a great New Yorker cartoonist on the cover, Barry Blitt. And the book came out. I'm going to just talk a little bit about what's in the book and just a broad brushstrokes. I think what you described already, Sandra, in terms of all the different acts, destructive acts committed by our president, you've already outlined very clearly. The book was published by Penguin Random House in September of 2018, so that's 2 years ago. And that means it's dated. But if the book were published last week and we were talking about it today, it would still be dated. Because if it were published, say, 10 days ago, we wouldn't have had Trump getting COVID, getting hospitalized, getting out of the hospital in a psychotic state on an excessive amount of steroids without anything to control him, going to rallies, becoming a super spreader. I mean, all of those things wouldn't be in the book if it were just published a week or two ago. So what this means is that two things it means. It means that events have changed. Those are all new events, but Trump has not changed. Those are the two things. And Trump's psychology, therefore, that's in the book is actually the same as it's been since he was a very young man. It's gotten worse since he's been president, and certain issues have become exacerbated, but his basic psychology is pretty much the same as it's always been. So a normal update, if we were just doing a normal update after September of 2018, just to list some of the events, you've already mentioned some of them, Sandra, but they're pretty amazing when you stop and think about them. He was impeached. There was Black Lives Matter and police brutality issues. There was the COVID pandemic. There was an incredible unemployment, a mass unemployment. There's been strenuous efforts he's made to to subvert the 2020 elections. All that would have been in an update for the book, but his psychology is the same. He is unfit to be president. There's no question about it. He's dominated by a lifetime of unacknowledged, unprocessed anxiety. And the anxiety is so great that it keeps him from being able to read or concentrate. It keeps him from being able to think, and he has to evacuate it. I mean, he has to get it out of his system as soon as possible. And the way he does this, which we all have experienced in this country, even his supporters, is he makes us anxious. He gets rid of it, and then he says, I alone can fix it. And he says things to instill anxiety and fear. And it's because he cannot contain his own anxiety psychologically. He's unable to metabolize it, so he has to convert it into action. You see this in young children. You see this more in little boys than girls, where they might hit somebody as a way of discharging their anxiety and their tension when they don't have words to use. Well, Trump, if you're a person who has dyslexia, has a problem reading, has a problem understanding and thinking, he's not going to have the way to bind his anxiety. And anxiety is bound through language, through thinking, through feeling, through empathy, through paying attention to other people. He doesn't have that. And the second thing about his presidency is what you mentioned right away, Sandra, which is that he's destructive. And by being destructive, I mean really wanting to break things. And he came to the presidency as a builder more than as a destroyer. But as he has evolved, it's very clear that he's more of a destroyer than a builder. And one thing we all know is it's much easier to tear things down than it is to build things up. And the reason for his being a destroyer are pretty much outlined in the book, and they're based on his childhood, based on early experiences, which the first half of the book deals with: his relationship to his mother, his father, his older brother, and then his growing up years and his relationships to his business partners before we got into the specific dynamics. And one of the things that was important in terms of his being a destroyer is that it has to do with the fact that his father was a tyrant. He was tyrannical at the home. Everything was run like clockwork, and he would yell and scream at the children if they didn't toe the line, all of them. He was very much there as a little martinet, if you will. And then his mother also posed a problem because his mother, Trump was the fourth of five children. He was the second son. So it was his oldest brother, two sisters, and then him, and then a younger brother, Robert, who just died this past year of COVID, and that was related to, on top of a brain hemorrhage she suffered from a fall. One of the things that the mother did was that the mother was sickly and not always available. So one of the ways one learns as an infant to contain anxiety and manage it is to have the mother be able to soothe the infant, be able to understand where the baby is coming from, and provide certain kinds of containing functions so the baby is less frightened, and the baby over time internalizes the ability to contain himself. I don't think Trump ever got that far as a child, and I wonder what he was like even in utero, because my guess is, for those women who've had multiple pregnancies, each pregnancy is different, and I have a feeling that he kicked a lot in the womb. But that being as it may, his mother suddenly disappeared from his life when he was 2, when she was hospitalized with the 5th child because she had a terrible hemorrhage and almost died. She had 4 surgeries. She was out of the house for a while. And when she came back, she was fairly sickly. So I think it's second nature. We can fast forward to now. It's second nature for Trump to revisit the kind of pain that he experienced on babies in the border. He really doesn't care so much about the children, and he separates them from their mothers in a very reckless and cruel way, in the way he may have felt once separated from his mother. But what he does is he turns passive into active. He turns feeling like a victim into the person who's going to express the aggression. And that's where he's become like his father as a tyrant in some ways, and he's become like his mother as being unavailable, cold, without empathy. So these are all things that are discussed in the book. His anxiety, which I mentioned in the beginning, that drives him, has become worse since he's been president. And it's because of the awesome responsibility he has, even though he denies it, and the fact that he is required to make decisions and to think. And instead of doing those things, he does executive orders that he just throws out, and he does a lot of tweeting, but he really can't pay attention. I think that his destructive attacks are powerful, and his disorganized state is powerful, as you've heard some of his recent call-ins to Fox and Friends. He's pretty much unhinged. Now, tonight we're going to talk about some of the basic concepts in the book, which one of them is that he sees himself as a victim, despite being the most powerful person in the world, most likely. He blames others always, does not take responsibility. And that's a particular dynamic to avoid responsibility, and has certain meaning. He lies. He attacks reality. He attacks what I call material reality. He talks about fake news, and he undermines the press because he feels that the press is the enemy of the people, meaning that they speak in terms of reality. They're the enemy of his version of reality. So in hospital terms, we call people like this, they have a solipsistic reality. Their reality is completely defined by their own worldview and nothing else. So they fit whatever experience they have into their preconceptions. Now, the book examines again Trump as the fourth child. When he was a little boy, his aggression was already very clearly evident. When he was about 5, he started throwing rocks at a toddler who was in a playpen next door in the backyard. The mother was totally upset and freaked out and came and talked to Mrs. Trump about it. He's always been an aggressive person. He was in detention every day in elementary school. They used to call it the DTs, which is an interesting term, the Donald Trumps. He was just called, he's at DT in the principal's office after school. His father was very tough, and his older brother, Fred Jr., who was named for the father, was very beloved and very friendly and a completely different personality from Donald. And he was groomed to be in the family business until he confronted his father when he was about 16. And then his father confronted him because his father was cutting corners with construction materials and costs. And Fred Jr. was upset about it and didn't want to do it. Father yelled at him, screamed at him. And Donnie, who was about 8 then, saw this and vowed never to cross his father. So all of his delinquent behavior, which we've seen now, went underground, and he tried to lie. He lied and he kept things secret from his father. He collected a huge collection of switchblade knives that he got from sneaking into Manhattan. And by the time he was 12, his father had enough and sent him to military school because there was no way the father could cope with him, even though the father was a tyrant. At a military school, Don learned certain things, which was to keep quiet about some of the things he was thinking. And he learned how to make his bed, and he learned how to be very orderly, overtly, but covertly, he was the same as he always was. So those things are talked about, and his dyslexia, which is not talked about except in this book, really now some other people are talking about it. He had rage reactions. And one of the things that happens with people who can't read is they feel ashamed of it and they make things up. They become fabulous. They make stories up all the time about who they are. And there's a lot of that in the book. And then definitely there's stuff about his various defense category. So what I wanted to do tonight is show some clips from the debate against Joe Biden that will illustrate some of these qualities, and maybe we can discuss some of them in a little bit of detail in terms of where they come from and what they're about. Basically, we've talked about his inability to contain anxiety and his destructiveness. The third thing that's necessary is his hatred of reality. And I mean hatred. He hates history. He hates the fact that people did things before he could. He unconsciously displaces his attacks on his father, who he was very frustrated with and angry with and afraid of, onto our nation, onto the founding fathers. So he undermines what the founding fathers stood for. He undermines the Constitution. He undermines the rule of law, because to him, law is tyrannical and it's controlling. So he's against all regulation and hates it. And you'll see in these clips from the debate, throughout the debate, he hates the rules and regulations of the debate itself. He attacks the debate just as much as he attacks the FBI and the CIA and the Constitution and the Democrats and the press and anybody who disagrees with him. So it's really, when he wrote his first book, he talked about how he exaggerates the truth as a salesman. This was in 1987, and he called it truthful hyperbole. That's a nice term for lies. And I call it solipsistic reality. So why don't we start with the first clip number 1. which has to do with his hating rules and regulations. Here we go.
The Trump administration, along with 18 state attorneys general, are seeking to overturn Obamacare, to end Obamacare. You have spent the last...
Because they want to give good health care.
If I may ask my question, sir.
Good health care.
Over the last 4 years, you have promised to repeal and replace Obamacare, but you have never in these 4 years come up with a plan, a comprehensive plan to replace Obamacare.
Of course I have.
Well,
I got rid of the individual mandate.
I'm going to give you an opportunity.
I got rid of the individual mandate, which was a big chunk of
Obamacare.
That is absolutely a big thing. That was the worst part of Obamacare.
Sir,
Chris, that was the worst part of Obamacare.
Let me ask my question.
Well, I'll ask Joe. The individual mandate was the most unpopular aspect of Obamacare. I got rid of it.
And we will protect people with pre-existing conditions. I'm the moderator of this debate, and I would like you to let me ask my question, and then you can answer your question. Go ahead. You, in the course of these 4 years, have never come up with a comprehensive plan to replace Obamacare. And just this last Thursday, you signed a largely symbolic executive order to protect people with pre-existing conditions 5 days before this debate. So my question, sir, is what is the Trump health care plan?
Fine. Well, first of all, I guess I'm debating you, not him, but that's okay. I'm not surprised. Let me just tell you something, that there's nothing symbolic.
Well, let's stop there. We could now spend the next 2 or 3 days talking about that one episode because it illustrates a lot of things. So I'll just pick a couple of them. First of all, he is psychologically compelled to destroy everything that was created before him. That's part of his hatred of history. Partly it's because Obama was a black man who was president, and there's a deep history of racism in the Trump family. But partly it's that anybody could have done something before him. It's attacking fathers, founding fathers. He gives lip service to making America great, but he's the one who's going to make it. He's responsible. So when he says he took care of the mandate by, he offered a plan by eliminating the mandate, that's a very telling statement to me, because it means that he takes care of things by destroying them. Because mandates to him are rules and regulations that people have to obey and pay money in order to get the proper kind of Obamacare. The people who are not ill have to pay some money to help support the Obamacare for others. But what he's saying deeply, unconsciously, is to him, making a change and doing something different involves breaking things. His goal is to break things, and that's very sad, that his deepest plan is to break all the rules. Now, there's several sources of that. We've talked about one is with his father being so destructive and critical, but also his mother, because he breaks intimacy, he breaks care, he breaks the doctor-patient relationship, he breaks people being able to get help when they're sick. He can't stand people who need other people. They're weak, they're dependent. And those are all projections of his own weakness, his own fears, and his own concerns about his own dependency. So one of the things that happens between mothers and children, and infants in particular, is a phenomenon called break and repair, which is that when the mother go to the phone or do something or put the baby down when she's nursing, she feels bad and the baby cries. Then she tries to make things up by hugging and cuddling the baby coming back. And that's a process that goes on in micro levels many times a day for a long time in the first year of an infant's life. And it's called break and repair. And that every time there's a repair, the infant internalizes a greater sense of confidence and a sense of strength, and that repair can be made and that pain can be mended and healed, which, by the way, is what Joe Biden is about, it seems to me. But what Trump did was that when things were broken, he was so angry that he wouldn't allow anything to be mended. He would just break things back, and he writes about that a lot. So I think that most of it is an attack on his mother and on the reparative process. And I think that's what his attacks on Obamacare are about. He never had a plan. Chris Wallace was right. The second part, there's so many other parts where he interrupts Chris Wallace, where he talks over everybody. There's a couple of things that are important about that that are related to dyslexia and learning disability. He talks because he can't listen. He can't take things in. And anything he hears is a potential criticism and an attack. So he can't take things in and he has to talk over the other person. He had contempt for his father. He had contempt for his predecessors. He thinks maybe there's one person who might have been as good as him as Abe Lincoln, but that's about it. So let's go to episode 2. There's more.
We did. We got the gowns. We got the masks. We made the ventilators. You wouldn't have made ventilators. And now we're weeks away from a vaccine. We're doing therapeutics already. Fewer people are dying when they get sick. Far fewer people are dying. We've done a great job. The only thing I haven't done a good job, and that's because of the fake news. No matter what you say to them, they give you bad press on it. It's just fake news. They give you good press. They give me bad press because that's the way it is, unfortunately.
Okay, so here we have a man who has done a perfect job as far as dealing with COVID in terms of the supplies he's offered. His definition of himself is that he's perfect. He gets a 10 out of 10. He said this before. He says this in the debate and in the question about how he dealt with the pandemic. But then he switches to saying that the one thing he didn't do well was getting credit for things and dealing with the fake news. But then he sounded like somebody a little bit different if you listen carefully. He sounded like a whiny child who says, "You like my brother better than me. You love my brother more than me. You love Joe more than me. Of course you love him. I get no credit. I get nothing. I do everything right. I build buildings, I do everything, and I get no credit because you hate me." That's the sound of a sibling rivalry situation where Donnie, as a little boy, couldn't understand how come so many people, including him when he was really little, he loved his older brother too, how everyone loved Fred and didn't like him. And now he's discovering the same thing, that Joe is like Fred. Joe is his older brother that everybody loves and nobody loves him. And that's taken over everything. So he has turned himself into a victim. And that's one of the things that people who are paranoid do. And it's one of the things that he's done. No matter how powerful he is, he's always a victim. And it's a very important flip side to his grandiosity. So on the one hand, he's perfect and he does everything. And on the other hand, he's a hopeless victim. And he is able to contain these two completely opposite views of himself and never integrate them into a whole personality. They're like there and they exist in isolation. It's a phenomenon psychoanalytically that we call splitting or dissociation. He has these two opposite views. I'm the best, I'm a victim. Okay, let's go to number 3.
Begun to increasingly question the effectiveness of masks as a disease preventer. And in fact, recently you have cited the issue of waiters touching their masks and touching plates. Are you questioning
No, I think
the
masks
efficacy
are okay.
of
You have
masks?
to understand, if you look, I mean, I have a mask right here. I put a mask on, when I think I need it. Tonight, as an example, everybody's had a test, and you've had social distancing and all of the things that you have to, but I wear masks when needed. When needed, I wear masks.
Okay, let me ask.
I don't wear masks like him. Every time you see him, he's got a mask. He could be speaking 200 feet away from it. He shows up with the biggest mask I've ever seen. I will say this.
Vice President Biden, go ahead, sir.
Look, the way to open businesses is give them the wherewithal to be able to open. We provided money.
But I was asking you, sir, about masks.
Well, masks make a big difference. His own head of the CDC said if we just wore masks between now, everybody wore masks and social distance between now and January, we'd probably save up to 100,000 lives.
Okay, now, there's a lot here too. The segment about wearing masks is something that has persisted with Trump. But I think what's important about it is that it's a couple of things. Trump was trained by his father to always be a king. He used these terms, king and a killer, and never admit you're wrong and never admit a mistake. Now, somehow he has made a link between wearing a mask and being weak. That somehow the virus is challenging his strength. And unconsciously, it's not clear what that is, but he really wants to defeat the virus without ever having to confront it directly, by protecting himself and by wearing a mask. Unconsciously, that's an attack also on reality. It's an attack on the fact that this virus is real and it can kill people and it can make people very sick. So Biden accepts reality. Biden wears a mask. Biden stays in the basement. Biden keeps distancing. Masks don't look very good on anybody, including Biden, but that's the way it is. So in his attack on reality and his fear of the virus, he then switches to attacking Biden and calls him a weak, wimpy guy for wearing a mask. But actually, Biden is the person who accepts reality. The reality is that the virus is real and dangerous and that we have to take care of ourselves first. And Trump does not. Trump does not believe in facts, and he ridicules people who do. And this is another form of his, what I call a defensive use of contempt, whereas he is really expressing contempt for somebody who accepts reality and accepts the facts of life. Let's go to number 4, about lying.
Will you tell us how much you paid in federal income taxes in 2016 and 2017?
Millions of dollars.
You paid millions of dollars?
Millions of dollars.
So
yes.
not 750.
Millions of dollars, and you'll get to see it. And you'll get to see it. But let me just tell you, Chris, let me just tell you something.
This is a brief clip because it was too much to keep watching it. But basically, he's lying about the fact that he actually, the returns are out and that he did pay $750 in taxes, federal taxes, 2 years running. And he lies, he exaggerates, and he talks over people. Again, it's the same process of talking over people. In 1913, to go way back, there was a psychoanalyst who wrote a paper, Ernest Jones was his name, who was actually the first major biographer of Freud. He wrote a paper about something called the God complex. And he described a certain kind of patient who was grandiose, but who had certain defense techniques that were actually hauntingly similar to the things that Trump does. One of them is always saying, "We'll see," whenever there's any kind of confrontation, because people with unconscious God complexes are letting you know that they know the future, and we'll see what happens, but meaning that I will see what happens, and I will tell you when it happens. There's other aspects of it. They're vague. They don't write down their ideas. They demand immediate results. There's a whole series of characteristics that I deal with in the book about the God complex. But I think that what is most powerful is the lying. And I'm just going to say one word about the lying that is in the book. A person who lies to the pathological degree that Trump does is a person who was once lied to. And from the deep studies, analytic studies of liars and people who've analyzed liars, they've discovered that many people, most of them, felt lied to by their parents, and particularly lied to when their parents told them they loved them, because they used the words to say, "I love you," but their behavior was different. Either they were neglectful or depressed or working hard or cruel, who knows, all kinds of different things. So the child then becomes a liar. if I can't beat him, I join him and I become the liar. And that's what Trump did. And he's been lying ever since. And we'll see other examples about how he lies about clean air, clean water, and all kinds of things. But the sources of that lying is that he is unconsciously also mocking his own parents. So let's go to number 5, about fathers and sons.
China ate your lunch, Joe, and no wonder your son goes in and he takes out billions of dollars. Takes out billions of dollars to manage. He makes millions of dollars. And also, while we're at it, why is it, just out of curiosity, the mayor of Moscow's wife gave your son $3.5 million. What did he do to deserve it? What did he do with Burisma to deserve $183,000?
You've asked a question, let him answer.
None of that is true.
Oh, really?
Totally,
He didn't get $3.5 million?
Mr. President,
totally,
Mr. President, please.
totally discredited. Totally discredited. And by the way,
well, wait, he didn't get $3.5 million, Joe?
Mr. Vice,
he got $3.5 million.
It is not true.
Oh, really?
Mr. President, it's an open discussion, please.
It's a fact.
Well, you have raised an issue. Let the Vice President answer.
Discredited.
Did Burisma pay him $183,000 a month with no experience in energy?
Mr. President,
my son did nothing wrong.
Okay. There's a couple of thoughts. First of all, he does with words and bullying and interrupting what Hitler did with planes invading France, invading England, invading Spain, the Netherlands, everywhere. It was called the Blitzkrieg. He uses a blitzkrieg of words to completely neutralize both the moderator, Chris Wallace, and also his opponent, debating opponent. He not just neutralizes, he renders them unable to defend themselves without screaming or doing something and running for cover eventually. And that's what the Blitzkrieg is. I didn't write this in the book about what I was thinking. This debate really confirmed something that I did write, but I didn't put in the book, which was about calling him the Adderall president. There's a way in which his behavior made me think that he was on some kind of drugs at the time, and that it was probably Adderall. Now, the other thing is that when you're attacking somebody, you can see a very clear element of Trump's defense mechanisms. The defense is that what he says about Hunter is that Hunter had no experience and was in the energy department. Trump has no experience. He never was in the government service and he became president. He was never in the military and he became president. So it's a projection that Hunter is a flip side of himself, a screw up. The younger brother, the older brother, Bo or Fred Jr., those brothers were heroic and much beloved, but Hunter is bad. Hunter is a cheat and Hunter is a screw up. And guess who is the biggest screw up ever? And that's our president. So he projects his own screw up state onto Hunter and then attacks him and attacks Joe Biden for fathering such a horrible person. I think it's almost time. I have about 7 or 8 more clips, but I'm also looking at the time, and it's and I only have about 5 or 6 more minutes according to the way things are set up. So what I'd like to do is start answering some questions and talk.
Well, Dr. Frank, if you wanted to, if there's of the remaining clips, if there's something you really significant you want to emphasize, maybe we could take 1 or 2 more and then go to questions.
Well,
if you wish. If not, we can go right to questions.
I think that the most important, well, we talked about him bullying and treating Biden the way also that he felt treated by his father, saying, say something, Joe, what's wrong with you? And answer my questions. And of course, he never gives him a chance to answer. But let's skip up to clip 8, because that is about race. And I think race is an important aspect that we haven't really talked about in Trump's racism. So could you go up to clip 8, number 8?
This month, your administration directed federal agencies to end racial sensitivity training that addresses white privilege or critical race theory. Why did you decide to do that, to end racial sensitivity training? And do you believe that there is systemic racism in this country, sir?
I ended it because it's racist. I ended it because a lot of people were complaining that they were asked to do things that were absolutely insane, that it was a radical revolution that was taking place in our military, in our schools, all over the place, and you know it, and so does everybody else. And he would know.
What is radical about racial sensitivity training, sir?
If you were a certain person, you had no status in life. It was sort of a reversal. And if you look at the people, we were paying people hundreds of thousands of dollars to teach very bad ideas and, frankly, very sick ideas. And really, they were teaching people to hate our country. And I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to allow that to happen. We have to go back to the core values of this country. They were teaching people that our country is a horrible place, it's a racist place, and they were teaching people to hate our country. And I'm not going to allow that to happen.
Vice President.
Okay, real quickly, we can see projection. He's the one who hates our country. He's the one who hates our founding fathers. Second of all, there's a paranoid element when he talks about there's a certain person who is a victim and has the finger pointed at them. Well, that certain person is a white person, and that certain person is unconsciously him. He is finding that these sensitivity programs will expose his own racism, which he has denied, but has perpetuated from his days of the Central Park Five and calling for Obama's birth certificate and all these different things he does. So, and Antifa now, he is a racist, but he reverses it. It's called a reversal of perspective. Suddenly the program teaching about racism, about sensitivity becomes racist. That's a reversal of, and he becomes the victim yet again of a program that he feels is based on hate. And it is a segue to number 9. So let's do number 9, because I think it's related to this and also important. And then we'll stop.
Okay.
But are you willing tonight to condemn white supremacists and militia groups and to say that they need to stand down and not add to the violence in a number of these cities, as we saw in Kenosha and as we've seen in Portland?
Sure,
are you
I'm
prepared to
do
specifically
that,
do it? Well, go ahead, sir.
I would say almost everything I see is from the left wing, not from the right wing.
So what are you saying?
I'm willing to do anything. I want to see peace.
Then do it, sir.
Say it. Do it. Say it.
Do you want to call him? What do you want to call him? Give me a name. Give me a
white
name.
Supremacists and
white
supremacists and right
Proud Boys. Stand back and stand by. But I'll tell you what. Somebody's got to do something about Antifa and the left, because this is not a right-wing problem. This is a left-wing.
FBI director
This is a left-wing problem.
White supremacist. Antifa's an idea, not an organization.
Oh, you got to be
not
kidding.
militia. That's what his FBI, FBI director said.
Well,
Now, I think Biden had a problem here by introducing Antifa as an idea, because it allows Trump to get off the hook. And Trump already is a pro at doing that. But let's just very briefly talk about white supremacy. He doesn't condemn white supremacy because he's a white supremacist. His father was a white supremacist. And he has to see that there's good people on both sides. That's the first thing, because he can't see himself as a bad person. He is an isolated, separate thing. A destructive breaker of things and breaker of bad things, and an ideal good person. They're separate. They're not connected. They're disconnected. And the second thing is that he makes threats, and he makes threats very easily when he said stand down and stand by about the Proud Boys. Those threats are there regularly. They're subliminal and they're overt. And they are part of being a bully and part of scaring other people. And he's always done it. I'm going to just stop with a brief vignette, which was that when he was a junior or senior in high school, he was on the baseball team. And when they were sitting on the bench before the game and the opposite team was on the opposite bench, he would take out an orange, a whole orange, and eat it with the skin and all, slowly and deliberately, as a way of letting the opposing team know that he was vicious and they were going to stop at nothing to win the game. He just slowly and methodically ate a whole orange. And maybe that's why his face is orange, who knows? Anyway, why don't we stop here?
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Frank. I think that we will move to questions. What I'd like to do actually is start with my own. Assuming that there may still be one more debate, and if you were on the Vice President Biden's debate prep team, what advice would you give him to manage Trump through the knowledge of his psychopathy? How would you advise him?
Well, I don't know how I would advise Biden. I know what I would do if Trump were on the inpatient ward and I were doing a demonstration interview for the students. The first question I would ask him then is, Donald, who loves you? Donald, who do you love? You have to stop him. And Biden can't ask those questions, but he can say, he can just say, stop talking about yourself. Everything you say about other people is actually about you. I've had it with that. Let's talk about things that are real. I'm here as a realist. I'm here as a person who wants to bring the country together and not divide it. I would just talk about his aggression and his destructiveness and never leave that subject.
Thank you.
I don't know
Michelle,
if it worked.
do you have some questions from our participants for Dr. Frank?
Yes, I do. And actually, I'm going to combine several of them because they're related. An anonymous attendee is asking, what is it about Trump that makes so many follow him? And following up on that, what is it about his followers? Are there strategies that would be helpful in talking to people who are psychologically drawn to someone like Trump as a leader? And also a variation on that, you know, there's so many times when he makes some ludicrous or outrageous statement and we react so emotionally, get panicked, get upset. Why do you think he can do that to us? And is the effect either positive or negative or just meaningless?
Wow. Here's the thing. Trump has a sixth sense. I don't know if he knew it before he started, but he understood something. And that is that there are a lot of people in America who have not the same degree of problems that he had, but who have felt unloved, narcissistically abandoned, not paid attention to, and they've had to keep their mouth shut. They have to be nice. They go to church. They say nice things, and they're politically correct. And Trump came in and said, enough. No more political correctness. I'm going to say whatever I want. And it really galvanized people and got their imagination that they could live vicariously through this guy who to them seemed like one of them, the way his accent and Queen's talk and all of that stuff. But he really tapped into a deep reservoir of long-standing resentment against rules, against having to be good. And then people are seeing now that there's brown and black people get ahead earlier. They can jump the queue. They can do affirmative action. And so I think that he tapped into a tremendous amount of rage. And I think that when he did that, people imprinted on him, very much like people imprint on a mother. Too long to go into imprinting, but basically they would follow him over a cliff because he understood them in some way. People who didn't have that kind of upbringing, who don't have those kinds of worries or have a very mild version of that, can't understand it. It does not make any sense. And it doesn't make sense to people, most people who don't follow him. But he is very closely followed and loved no matter what happens. And I don't think there's any way to separate those followers from him. They're going to follow him to the end of time. The only technique that might be used is if there could be some way of hearing him say things like he did with about losers in the military, if they could hear some of his contempt, and maybe they're hearing a little bit of it this last couple of days about COVID and the people who died from it. That's the only way to separate his followers from him, if they could realize that he has contempt for them too. That's about all I can say right now. It's a form of, there's a term that Bob Lifton, psychiatrist, brilliant guy, said. He calls it malignant normality. I think that's what we're stuck with right now.
Michelle, do you have others?
I do. Todd Thurwachter says, as a 3-decade Foreign Service officer with top secret clearance, followed by several years as a senior analyst at ONI, I'm particularly concerned about the risk to all aspects of our national security. Former Pence DHS aide Olivia Troy was right that the problem is even bigger than COVID. Trump just can't handle the truth. Facts on all aspects of national security are shaded or tailored to the self-serving narrative of an easily angered and vindictive president that he wants to be true. He ignores or even purges patriotic, career, nonpartisan public servants who dare to tell the truth. Isn't a commander-in-chief who can't handle the truth one of the greatest threats to our national security? And I wonder if Colonel Wilkerson may have a view on this as well.
Well, I'll start, and then I know Colonel Wilkerson will have maybe a better view of it more, but I want to say a couple of things. One is that it's not that he can't handle reality. He hates reality. He won't handle it. He wants to destroy his father. He's a destroyer of reality. So when he calls the press the enemy of the people, he means it. And so it's true that he hates reality, unless he's the one who scripts it and writes it and defines what's real. And that goes back to this idea of solipsistic reality, which you see mostly in hospitalized psychotic people. So he is definitely a danger to this country, to our security, because he won't learn about what's happening, what the world is doing, what other people are doing. He can't pay attention to any briefing papers or that there's any danger. And he certainly can't pay attention to anything that Putin does and anything that his fellow dictators, or he's a dictator wannabe, do, because he can't face them, but he really attacks reality in a way that is extremely disturbing and really dangerous to our security, because he won't know how to think or how to respond.
Michelle, let's hold off on the question for Colonel Wilkerson until we get to his segment. Could we move on to another question for Justin?
Yes, John Barrer asks, Trump has opened the rage in this country. Do you think Biden can put the genie back in the bottle, and how?
That's a great question. He has opened the rage. He's unleashed the rage. I think that Biden, the rage has been hiding under a rock. It's always been there for lots of people, including people who don't like Trump. I feel enraged at Trump myself sometimes. I think what Biden can do is not put the genie back in the bottle, but he can help transform the genie into something productive. He can transform the rage into something that is that we transform with children. You transform aggression into something productive and constructive. One of the best ways to transform is to have a massive highway rebuilding program, a massive rebuilding program of bridges, a massive kinds of things where people can work and feel good about expressing their aggression and their anger in hard work, in things that Roosevelt initiated in the 30s. I think that Biden has that capacity. You can't you can't suddenly say, oh, let's kumbaya and love everybody. I think that Obama tried to deal with rage by saying, we disagree. And he didn't deal with it enough either. He didn't talk about the purity of hatred. But I think that's a good question. I think Biden can do that, but he can help us channel it and talk about it and acknowledge the fact that people are furious as opposed to deny it, and that they do have good reason to be furious. And it's not like they're all racists and fools like Trump. they have good reason to be angry, and they can find ways to use it more productively. I'm very positive about that.
Michelle, let's take one more question.
Okay, Jim McNaughton asks if Mary Trump's family memoir adds anything to your conclusions.
Yeah, it adds nothing to my conclusions, but it was a great read, and it added certain examples that were quite fit with conclusions, but were things I never dreamed of. One is that he hired somebody to take his SATs in high school. It makes total sense, but I never knew that. The other thing that really struck me in her memoir for me was that once his father became demented and started down the Alzheimer's road, Trump would make fun of him and mock him. And Mary Trump talked about that a little bit. And I was really struck by the fact that Trump finally had the courage, once his father was demented, or beginning to be demented, to confront him and to make fun of him. And her book is amazingly good. It does not change things, but it supports and enriches what I wrote. I really like the book a lot.
Well, thank you. Dr. Frank, I want to thank you for your illuminating and terrifying psychoanalysis of Trump. We'll look forward to hearing from you again later in the program. Our next speaker is Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson, Distinguished Visiting Professor of Government and Public Policy at the College of William and Mary. Colonel Wilkerson served 31 years in the U.S. Army. His final assignments were Special Assistant to then Chairman of the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Colin Powell, and later Deputy Director and Director of the U.S. Marine Corps War College at Quantico, Virginia. He serves as an advisory member of the Transition Integrity Project. Please welcome Colonel Wilkerson, and please remember to write your questions for him in the Q&A box. Over to you, Colonel Wilkerson.
Well, thank you, Sandra, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to talk to an audience that clearly was rapt during Dr. Frank's presentation, and I hope that represents a real profound interest in what I'm going to talk about, because what I'm going to talk about is the elections coming up. Just a little history on my involvement with this process of looking at the presidential and congressional elections in a way that perhaps America has never looked at them before. And that's saying a lot, because we can go back to 1864 when Lincoln thought he was going to lose, and even advised his cabinet to go out and find other employment. And then Sherman won in Atlanta, and the Union forces won battles in Tennessee, and Lincoln's whole fortunes changed, and he was reelected only to be assassinated shortly thereafter. Or we could come forward to 1876 when we had a real terrible situation in this country, where one of the things we're contemplating could be a possibility this time around actually occurred, and you had two candidates, both of them assuming they were elected and planning inaugurations that were separate, Rutherford Hayes and Samuel Tilden. And the only way they resolved that at the last minute was they made a bargain. And the bargain was to put Black Americans back in economic chains, Jim Crow, for another 100+ years. So when I say this is going to be the most contentious American election in history, that's not a unthought of or unthought about proposition. We have given enormous thought to that, and that's what we are saying. And when I say we, I'm really talking about three different groups. I'm talking about the National Task Force on Election Crises at electiontaskforce.org. Anybody can look it up, which I joined in June of 2019. And when we met for the first time in that month, we decided that our objective was going to be free and fair elections. That was it. It was that simple. We were not going to have a political dog in the fight. We just wanted to make sure, because even that early, we suspected there were going to be problems, that we had free and fair elections. Well, after listening to us debate, some 50 of us, only a couple of Republicans there, myself and one other, as I recall, at that time. After listening to the debate, I simply offered this view as one of the few Republicans in the meeting. I said, it's all well and good that we're sitting around in this room and we're talking in terms of free and fair elections and making that our overriding purpose. Let me assure you that in at least 9 states, and you can probably name them as well as I, and possibly more, people from my party are sitting around in rooms just like this, having discussions just like this, but their purpose is to have unfree and unfair elections. It's that simple, because they know the demographics of America are such that if they continue the way they have for the last 20 years, with a very closed tent, only white males who are reasonably wealthy, and only women who are white and follow along in good biblical tradition, then they're not going to exist much longer unless they cheat, unless they bring all kinds of shenanigans to the game. Everything from gerrymandering, which is quite traditional actually, but being given new looks by my Republican Party, to fixing the vote. This is what we're up against. We're up against a party that knows it can't win unless it cheats. So I want you to take that into your consciousness and realize that that's what we're dealing with. And ever since then, we have been getting more and more deeply concerned about the elections in November. Even with this attitude of free and fair elections, we just want it to happen, may the best man win, and so forth. The Transition Integrity Project, on the other hand, which I joined in January, it actually stood up in January of this year, had as its objective not to be apolitical or to be bipartisan or transpartisan, but to actually take a hard look at what they thought was going to be an extremely difficult transition process. That is to say, once the winner was determined or the ambiguity was established as to who was the winner, what would happen between that moment, 3 November, 5 November, 10 November, and the moment of constitutional clarity at noon on the 20th of January, when the existing Oval Office occupant has to leave, unless of course he's reelected. That gave us a different venue, or a different mandate, if you will. And we got as concerned and as profoundly concerned about that period as we were about the election itself in the other group. So those two groups have kept my attention for at least 2 or 3 days a week ever since June in the one case and January in the other case. One of the things the Transition Integrity Project did that was somewhat unique, some of us from the military suggested it. Rosa Brooks, one of the directors, and Niels Gilman, the other director, more or less came out of whole cloth with it in terms of the way they actually executed it, with good gamers and so forth. The idea of doing simulations, the idea of doing what people have called war games. They're really better called simulations, tabletop exercises, what you will. And what we did was we created a situation where we had different parties, including observers like myself in 2 of the games, to contest the election in as realistic a way, given alternative but realistic scenarios in order to contest in. We did 4 that I was familiar with, and you can read the report. You can just Google the Transition Integrity Project and their report. And most of you probably have, I hope you have anyway. You will see that the 4 scenarios were something like this. Ambiguous result where we had actually a tie in the Electoral College and a blue shift to Biden in the popular vote, so that it looked at election day close, one candidate won, and then 3 or 4 days later, the other candidate won the popular vote. So we call that an ambiguous result. And we put a fairly high probability on that one. Now remember, this was some months ago that we did this, so things have changed with the COVID-19 pandemic and other aspects of Trump's behavior, as was very frightfully just gone over by Dr. Frank. In fact, I have to say my concerns have been deepened majorly by having listened to him. But the second scenario was a Biden clear win in the Electoral College and the popular vote. And we have, since that time, come to the conclusion that, just as a footnote here, that's probably the result. We call it a blowout for Biden. That's probably the result that will produce the least contention. And then the third scenario, but even then, with a blowout in the Electoral College and the popular vote for Biden, we had some real problems with the Trump team. Everything from trying to destroy physical property, trying to steal everything in sight, trying to keep the transition process from actually happening. Footnote that for a minute. I know something about that because in 2000, when George W. Bush and Al Gore were contesting in the courts, it didn't get settled, and we, Colin Powell, myself, didn't get to the Harry Truman building, the State Department, until 20 December. And we really didn't begin an official transition process until about 5 days later. Well, we had such an accelerated transition that I think that's part of the reason we dropped the ball on Al-Qaeda. We did not have a chance to come back and get more briefings, more intense briefings, more detailed briefings on Al-Qaeda. Secretary of State only got one, and his only interest was in one of our embassies or consulates overseas being attacked, which we suspected, and we wanted to get money from the Congress to beef up the defenses of the consulates and the embassies overseas. We had no concept of an attack on the United States. Yet there were people in the Clinton administration who did. In fact, there were several people who were seized of that matter. But we had such a short transition that it really didn't catch. And we did not have a National Security Council meeting, a formal decision-making meeting, until August. And 9/11 happened a few weeks afterwards. So I think a truncated transition is a dangerous situation. And this is what the Trump administration tried to do. They simply abandoned everything. There were no policy briefings. There were no transition briefings. There was nothing. They went and traveled the world and spent the most money they possibly could and so forth. Now, let me back up and tell you who was playing these people. The Trump team was played by basically Republicans, real, qualified, political, national security, diplomacy experts. These were people who constituted the Republican team. So we were looking at some 800-pound gorillas in some cases playing the Republican team. By that, I mean some really important people. If I threw their names out there, you'd recognize them all. Some of them have come out, like Bill Kristol. Others, like Michael Chertoff and so forth, have come out. But most of them don't want their names to be made public. On the Democratic team was the equivalent. I think John Podesta's name has been out there. But these were the kind of people who played the Democratic team and the Republican team. So even in this blowout scenario for Joe Biden, Trump and his goons did their best to inflict as much damage on the United States government, and even more so on the incoming administration, as they possibly could. It was more than just the usual joke in the West Wing, you know, where you open your center desk drawer and the note says, "Welcome to the West Wing and all the problems thereof," which I have seen before. It was serious stuff. There was nothing there, maybe even not any office furniture. In the third scenario, it was a Trump win in the Electoral College, about 286 to 252, but Biden won the popular vote, 52 to 47%, and this created what we labeled afterwards a constitutional crisis, because many Americans, some 100 million plus, were simply not ready to accept another president determined in that sense. And so we had all kinds of people taking to the streets, made the Black Lives Matter movement look like child's play. A really contentious result. And then the fourth one was a narrow Biden win with 278 in the Electoral College and a thin popular vote margin that the Trump team then used every manner possible, legal and otherwise, to contest all the way up and pass Inauguration Day. So you could say we had an extremely indecisive situation. And in all of these situations, with the exception of the Biden blowout, win in the Electoral College, win in the popular vote, very significant, quick, decisive, with the exception of that one, we had the potential and the possibility and the probability in the more contentious results of what we call Trump's base coming to the streets. And they didn't come to the streets unarmed. They came armed. And so we actually started using terms like civil war, like bloodshed, and so forth and so on. Very possible, let me put it this way, high severity, low probability, but the very fact that we looked at it and that it got played and that there were people making rational decisions that produced it tells you something. That's a vivid insight. Another insight we gained, which is a blinding flash of the obvious, you'll all recognize it immediately, is just how much advantage it gives you to be the incumbent. You have the levers of power at your beck and call, whether it's law enforcement, whether it's contractors working for Homeland Security and dressing up like military personnel and going out and doing, quote, law enforcement for the president, whether it's sending people to the polls to intimidate voters, particularly minorities, whether it's like Governor Abbott in Texas, in Harris County with more than 4 million people, limiting the county to one drop box and not falling off that. All of these different things played in this, and you got a great deal of American population, regional, state, and even in the country in some cases, truly incensed. And it wasn't just on the right that they got incensed, it was on the left too. So these four scenarios played essentially in the sort of setting that I described, where you had a Supreme Court represented as a neutral party, if you will. That's not necessarily the right way to represent them today, is it? But that's the way we represented them. They would make good legal decisions. You had the Congress represented as itself. You had the media represented and so forth. And then you had the players. When you look at what happened, and I should mention too, we had a die, a single, we threw it and the computer threw it. And you introduce fate or random chance by having that die. And what do I mean by that? Well, you might have had a proposal by the Trump team and a proposal by the Biden team, and they came out into the adjudication process, and you really couldn't say with any great certainty how those things, once they collided, were going to resolve themselves. So we simply threw the die. And we had a range of numbers that said this one's for Biden, and a range of numbers that said this one's for Trump, and a small range of numbers that said indeterminate. And so we had to go into another decision-making process. So it was a very sophisticated tabletop exercise with very sophisticated people, politically and otherwise, playing in it. The results in all cases, except the Biden blowout, were, as I said before, and as Dr. Franks has made me worry even more profoundly about, not good. To say the most contentious election in American history is perhaps understatement. When you start talking about the kinds of things that are pent up right now in the country, the kind of tensions that are pent up, the kind of hatreds that Trump has introduced to the country or introduced to Americans who already possessed those hatreds and now can let them fly free, as it were, whether it's the overt racism, whether it's his refusal to really exercise good leadership and put those things back where they should be, or whether it's the mismanagement of the COVID-19 pandemic, which I have to say something extra about. As we started to get enough information to where we could play that variable, or it's really a set of variables, into the games. And we were helped there by Dr. Mike Ulsterholm and others who gave us some pretty good predictions, if you will, on where the COVID-19 pandemic might be headed and what might happen as a result of that. We, I think, deepened our concern by a factor of 3 or 4. All you had to do is listen to Dr. Franks talk about some of the tendencies of this man, who is currently the occupant of the Oval Office, to understand how his mismanagement of the COVID-19 pandemic and his attempts to make up for that, or his attempts to deal with that, to put it aside, to essentially, now it appears, ignore it and let it just rip through the population however it may, intensify, exacerbate, and make potentially even worse some of these outcomes. And when you think that what we're being told is the most sound scientific projection, i.e. it will get worse in November, worse in December, that there probably won't be a vaccine at the earliest, maybe midsummer, late summer of next year. And all these other factors we're being told based on science, pretty good science, then you understand that the situation by the pandemic has been made much worse. So looking at all of this and trying to say, as we have, what's the best scenario? What could happen that would be positive, that would give us any optimism, that would make us feel like the election process will survive, our institutions will survive, indeed, our democracy will survive, such as it is now, as beaten and battered as it is. The Biden blowout. I'm a Republican. I'm not here to politic for Joe Biden, although I'll do it in a heartbeat, given the circumstances. But the Biden blowout, to us, electoral college win that is just decisive, like LBJ in '64. You know, that was a blowout of Barry Goldwater. It was an electoral college win unprecedented. It was a popular vote win unprecedented. We need that kind of win, decisive win today. That's the least apt situation, outcome of 3 November to produce the kind of really bad scenarios that we were examining and looking at and saying might have some probability. The other aspect of it that we've been looking at closely is what can we do in a positive sense? And now I'm really back to the National Task Force because its primary mission is that, as I said earlier, to help that happen, to make sure that that happens. I think what the National Task Force is doing answers a lot of those questions. We can make sure that every method of voting legally, effectively, and safely is available to the American people, and that they are encouraged strongly 24/7 to use one of those methods. To do, for example, as my wife and I are going to do tomorrow, to go down to the now very easy absentee voting place in Virginia of many and cast our ballots. We actually got our ballots for mail-in, and we decided, after reading the kind of confused instructions on the Virginia ballot about witness and not witness, we said, this is too important. We're going to walk down to the Pimmit Hills Library and we're going to vote in person, but early. Virginia allows you to do that. One of the things we've done in the National Task Force is look at all 50 states. We concluded early on with all the electoral politics and election experts we have in our group, and they are manifest. We've got some of the best people in the country in the group. They convinced us, rightfully so. It's all in the precincts. It is every bit in the precincts. The Congress really has little to do with it except setting the mandatory times and so forth. And the governors really don't have a lot to do with it. What works our elections is those precincts and those precinct workers. One of the lessons we learned in Wisconsin, for example, is get out there and get young people and train young people. We're doing it through the law school at William & Mary right now. And we've flooded that district around Williamsburg with young poll workers, trained and ready to go, certified and everything, because they are not as afraid of the COVID-19 pandemic. In Wisconsin, we saw lots of people not show up because they were 65 and older. That was a lesson learned in the primaries, and we've applied that. Other things we have learned are like that, or even more profound than that. For example, everyone's heard of this, I'm sure. This blue shift phenomenon could be an incredible element that Trump could try to exploit. that the Republicans could try to exploit. And it's everything from a governor who might be a Republican sending a different slate of electors to Washington than a legislature that might be Democratic sends to Washington, and then having to contest those two electoral slates in Washington and determine which one's the one they're going to accept, or negate and thus disenfranchise all those voters. Pennsylvania is a state that meets that criteria, if you will. North Carolina is a difficult state. Wisconsin, Michigan, Florida, Texas. We did a little look at Texas in the task force. We pointed out to the governor of Texas that he had 27 precincts in which there was absolutely no backup. And by the way, there are quite a few precincts in other states like that. So we took a high school skill hacker in and stole 2 million votes. Governor, what are you going to do now? You have no way to reconstitute those votes because you have no backup, no paper, nothing, no backup. So what do? Well, we're going to call new elections. Texas statutes prohibit you from doing that unless you're going to get the statutes changed. By the way, Governor, have you thought about, and Secretary of State, have you thought about that you're going to do something that's not fair? What do you mean? Well, you're going to hold a new election, you're going to let people vote again, and they're going to vote having known the results of the election everywhere else. That's not fair. And how are you going to assure that those people who vote in that new election, because their votes were lost, vote the same way they did in the first try? It's a mess. So, advice, get you some backup. Problem there, Mitch McConnell has held up funding in the Senate that would pay for many of the things that the states need to do, even if they would do them, because as you probably know, more states are in the hands of the Republicans, either the state house or one of the bodies or all three, than they are in the Democrats. So you've got that problem also. We looked at many other aspects of this precinct, important part of the election process, everything from, okay, let's look at Portland, let's look at Detroit, let's look at Kenosha, let's look at some of these others. What might Trump do to intimidate voters? Well, the Republican Party will send all kinds of observers out. What will those observers look like? Well, they'll look like Proud Boys with tattoos all over them, Confederate flags flying, and, blah, blah, blah. What are they there for? Well, they're there to intimidate minority voters, just as Governor Abbott is trying to disenfranchise minority voters by having one drop box in Harris County, Texas, with 4+ million people. These are things that are going to happen. We know they're going to happen. So we're getting with all the secretaries of state, the governors, the precinct leaders themselves, with other organizations in the country working on the same things we're working on, but with a grassroots focus. And we're saying, okay, what can we do to help you? How can we help you? What do you need? Where does it have to go? Who's handling it? And so forth. Of course, because we can't be in all 50 states 24/7, we're focusing on the battleground states. We're focusing on states like Texas, like Pennsylvania, like Wisconsin, like Michigan, like Florida, and we're focusing on Arizona. We're looking at the ways we can help, and we're trying to expedite those ways, getting to the ground, getting to the precincts. He could also, the president, remember what I said about being the possessor of the federal power? He could also federalize the National Guard in any given state and use it to intimidate voters. Or he could send in active duty forces. We've come to the conclusion, especially after Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Milley's apology to the troops and to the officers of the military after he made that crazy promenade to St. John's Episcopal Church with Trump holding the Bible upside down. We think we've got the military, not we, but the military is in the right place right now, where it should be, with its allegiance, as General Milley said so eloquently in his speech. Its allegiance is not to the man in the White House, it's to the Constitution. And as long as that is the parameter the military is looking at, don't think the active duty military, we don't think the active duty military is going to get involved in anything, unless civil war breaks out, and then, the Insurrection Act, and anybody's guess as to what could happen. We hope that it doesn't get that dire. But there are problems with the National Guard that could be exacerbated by governors, wouldn't have to be federalized. The governor would just say, I think we've got some protests there that look bad. I think I'm going to put the National Guard there. Oh, there's a polling place or two there. Oh, well, you're not even supposed to be in the vicinity of a polling place if you're in uniform. I learned this the hard way when I tried to vote for Sam Nunn in Georgia one time, and I drove up in my Jeep with my .45 pistol on my hip and my uniform on, and one of the federal marshals there said, "Leave, sir, you can't come here." I said, "I want to vote." He said, "You can't come here. Go change into civilian attire and you can come back and vote." So that could happen, though, with this president. You heard Dr. Franks. As I said, he made my concerns even more profound. And I suspect if the members of either one of my task forces had heard what he said tonight, they would be more concerned too. And I think too, and we've observed this, he's getting worse. I don't think anyone can, and I'd love to hear Dr. Franks comment on this. I don't think anyone can say, having seen him in the last 30 days or so with the COVID virus, cured of the COVID virus, like the Pope in the window of the White House or on the balcony of the White House and so forth. I don't think anyone could say or conclude that he's not getting worse. I have a suspicion, a strong suspicion now, getting stronger every day, that he might do something untoward between now and November the 3rd, let alone after November 3rd and an ambiguous election or an indecisive election. That might include just leaving. And no one would applaud that more loudly, more consistently, and longer than I. It's just looking terrible as far as we're concerned, and as far as I'm concerned. I don't know that it could get any worse in terms of the president himself and the persona and the posture he takes and what it's doing, for example, to our image in the world. I get calls from Berlin, I get calls from Tokyo, I get calls from Toronto this morning, I get calls from allies, I get calls from friends I have in China, both English-speaking friends and members of the Chinese Foreign Ministry whom I met when I was at the State Department, simply asking me, "What is going on, Larry? What is happening? What does it mean? How can we help? Can we help? Are we going to get out of this? Is he going to be defeated? Is Biden going to become the president? And what do you think he'll do as his first moves?" And so forth and so on. Our allies and our friends in the world are deeply concerned about where we are and where we might be after November the 3rd. I think it's fair to say that many of them have a contract in their hand, as it were. And if he's reelected, they're going to take that contract and sign it with somebody else. Whether it's Germany finally opening Nord Stream 2 and the pipeline from Gazprom, the monopoly that Putin is associated with in Russia, and more or less consigning their energy fate to Moscow, or it's France trying to figure out where it goes if Germany becomes a vassal state of Moscow, or whether it's Australia trying to figure out if they still should be our rigid ally come hell or high water, or it's the United Kingdom, which can't figure out whether it wants to be part of Europe or isolated and alone and sucked up to America. Does it want to suck up to this America? The situation in the world right now, from one end to the other, is dire. It's seriously bad. And it's been made that way in many respects by Republicans and Democrats. Republicans and Democrats not paying attention to the fact that we have become an empire that knows only how to use force in order to get its message across, in order to get what it wants. And that force is either economic sanctions, which constitute warfare under international law, especially sanctions like those we have on Cuba, Iran, Russia, and so forth. They're war. The only reason we haven't been attacked back, and don't think we haven't been attacked back under the table, but we haven't been attacked back with military forces because we still have superior military power. I say still have because that could be degraded also. We are in serious international trouble with regard to what Trump has done. George W. Bush, my term, started. And Barack Obama, for all that you might think positively about him, continued majorly in many ways: drone warfare, national security letters, prosecution of whistleblowers, unprecedented, and so forth. Trump has accelerated. He's been a catalyst to that. And we are sitting at a point right now where we are as bad off internationally as we have been since Britain wanted us to stay with the home country. It's that bad. And this man is exacerbating that situation in North Korea, in Iran, in Venezuela, in South America writ large, in the Middle East writ large, with Russia, with our allies like Germany, France, and Britain, Tokyo, Japan, everybody. It's a mess right now. It's the worst mess I've seen in 76 years, 50 of which I've devoted to my country and been working in the government or the military or both in some way. So that's what Donald Trump has put a cap on, if you will. I'm not saying that George W. Bush didn't start it in a big way and even further back, but Trump has put a cap on it and just said, this is it. This is make America great again. This is what I mean by making America great again. And by the way, Dr. Frank's period before mine sort of explained to me in psychological terms why Trump has done some of this. And that makes it even more scary, more frightening. So last word, positive word, optimistic word. We need a blowout. We need an electoral college blowout. We need a popular vote blowout. We need a decisive win that even the Republicans who have learned all the dirty tricks, I guarantee you, I knew Karl Rove, have to accept, no matter. They have to accept it because it is overwhelming. I would even like to see, with all the new methodologies of voting, with all the different ways now that don't get tabulated because of state laws and because of new methodologies like mail-in voting, until maybe 5, 6, 7, 8, even 9 November, if it's close. I'd like to see on election day, by a close of business, by a close of polls, I'd like to see a decisive win that the media can say positively to the American people is Biden's victory. I think that will reduce the possibilities remarkably. And that's what we should shoot for. Thank you.
Well, Colonel Wilkerson, again, very illuminating. And I think I'll ask Michelle to go to questions first from the participants, and then I may wrap up with one too. Michelle, do you have some questions for us? For Dr.
Ray Marin asks, what longer-term fundamental changes do we need to make to our political system to render less likely the parlous scenarios that you've posited in the Transition Integrity Project's report?
That's an excellent question, and one at both task forces, the TIP and the National Task Force. We have promised ourselves we're going to, we're keeping records, diaries. We're going to make strong recommendations afterwards, and we're going to make sure the Congress gets them. Some of them have been fed there already. There are holes in our Constitution you could drive a Mack truck through. And what is filled those holes successfully for almost 200 years? It's a little bit different in the early days, but what has filled those holes is the decency, the camaraderie, the collegiality, ultimately the humanity and humaneness of those in the process. People might have taken names off gravestones, they might have stuffed ballot boxes, but when it came to the day and the election occurred and the results were overwhelming or even close, but determined, these people gave up. They conceded. They said it's more important. Look at Dick Nixon. He could have contested JFK, particularly with regard to Chicago, where cheating went on rampantly. There are other Al Gore. Al Gore could have carried everything to the nth degree in Florida in 2000 and beyond. He didn't. Decency prevailed, humanity prevailed, a respect for our institutions, our democracy, and the system prevailed. That's gone. And Dr. Franks told you why it's gone. We are going to make as many recommendations as we can to fill these holes with amendments, with statutes, whatever it takes, so that if we get another person like this, we have a better system to handle him or her. I'm reminded of a letter I got from Princeton when I was reading the book A Cross of Iron. A Cross of Iron is, of course, from Eisenhower's speech, where he says in 1953 to a group of newspaper editors, this is no way of life at all. He was talking about the Cold War and the military-industrial complex we'd built up in 53 to fight this Cold War. This is no way of life at all. Under the threatening cloud of war, this is humanity hanging from a cross of iron. That's Eisenhower, 5-star general, President Eisenhower. When he said that, he was talking about a phenomenon that has just grown out of all proportions now and dictates much of what America does in the world, even though it's not often sound policy when she does it. If we don't protect against the kind of man that was referred to by Walter Lippmann, one of the primary columnists of the day, when he heard this speech and when he heard what was happening in Washington and listened to Eisenhower and listened to others around Eisenhower, he said, well, you know, we can survive all of this. We can survive all of this if we just have good leadership, if we just get good leadership that understands, as Eisenhower does, what this is all about. And then this guy wrote a letter in and he said, but what if we get a dumb, strong man in the Oval Office? I'll always remember that letter because Donald Trump is a dumb, strong man in that office.
Well, here's another frightening question from Diane Perry, who says, how much danger are we in from other countries or terrorists who want to take advantage of a contested or contentious transition?
That's a good question, too. Let me just say that I think the smartest, most strategically oriented leader in the world right now is Vladimir Putin. I don't have any love for the man, nor his techniques or his methodologies. Certainly his politics, but he's extraordinary strategist. Every mistake we have made, with the most catastrophic one being the invasion of Iraq in 2003, every mistake he has capitalized on. He is playing from a very weak hand. He's playing with a country that is outside of Moscow, literally falling apart. It has fewer people in it than Pakistan. It has a longevity rate that's going down, not stabilized or going up. It's in terrible shape. He has very few cards to play, and yet he has beat us from one end of the world to the other. Whether we're looking at Syria, we're looking at Venezuela, we're looking at essentially the Chinese effort and Russian effort now too to de-emphasize the dollar. All these things he's doing behind the scenes, and Trump acts like it's not even a matter of concern. Putin has stolen the march on us. His three major objectives are get rid of NATO, Trump's helping him with that, break up the EU, Trump's helping him with that, and so is Britain with Brexit, and third, make sure that nuclear weapons are something that returns, and they have, for all intents and purposes, Russia to great power status, and then build the rest underneath that. Nuclear weapons are a real problem right now. We are we're on as dangerous ground right now with nuclear weapons as we were in 1962 with the Cuban Missile Crisis. It's that serious because there's no arms control to speak of. It's all falling apart. New START will go in February. That'll be the last one, and we're doing nothing about it. Trump is doing absolutely nothing about it. And we have new nuclear powers. We have North Korea on the scene. We should have Israel in the group. We should have Pakistan and India and China in the group. So we should multilateralize arms control and really go after it with a vengeance, or we're going to be staring down another existential crisis like climate change very shortly, if we're not already. So it's a real problem. It's a serious problem, what you've suggested.
Michelle, let's have one more question from the participants, please.
Okay. Greg Brandon alluded to some of the speculation that Trump would be so embarrassed should he lose that he would resign before the inauguration and Pence would effectively become president, and perhaps even going out, Trump would issue blanket pardons to people. And Greg was wondering if the TIP has made overtures to the Pence crowd, considering the probability that Trump will have resigned by then.
Actually, what you just talked about, with the exception of his resignation, the team did in that particular iteration of the simulations. They pardoned everybody. I mean, you actually had a situation where Trump pardoned himself before he left, realizing that New York might do something other than pardon him when he's no longer president. We didn't think about, it's an interesting idea, that he might resign, or I didn't, and I didn't hear anybody talking about it. Rosa or Niels or someone might have. And what would happen and what we might propose if it were to happen, if he resigned. It's an interesting idea. I will make note of it and pop it into the team and see what anybody thinks. I would suspect Pence would be doing that. I'm putting myself in his head for a minute, but Pence would be doing that so that he would, as my party, the Republican Party, must do, and I think it's going to be impossible, at least in the short term, he'd be trying to resurrect himself and position himself to be the candidate for the next time around for the Republican Party. And that might give him the motivation to do these sorts of things in a more or less positive, healthy way. I think my party is in for a generation in the wilderness. I think those who don't unleverage themselves, detach themselves, find a lifeboat from Trump, and it's looking increasingly like they're all going to, Lindsey Graham to Tom Cotton, you name them, they're all going to ride right to the end. They're going to be in the wilderness for a long, long time. I suspect we're going to see, if we do get a blowout, we're going to see a blowout also in the Senate and the House. A retention of the House, maybe an increase in the majority, and possibly as many as 57, 58 Democratic senators. I'd like to see more. I'd like to see cloture-proof totals. I'd like to see 61 or 2. But I think that's going to happen. I think my party is going to be in the darkness, in the wilderness, in the swamp for a long time. Look at our history. It's been there before. If you do the analysis from the radical Republicans under Thad Stevens and others who impeached Andrew Johnson in the years right after the Civil War, or you look at the growth of the Republicans as they became the Republicans and then on, you'll see we've had periods in the darkness before, long periods in the darkness. Look at LBJ's victory in '64, which I already referenced, blew us out, just blew us out in the Senate, the House, and of course the White House. But this is going to be new, I think, in terms of its impact on the Republican Party. Colin Powell once told the Republican Party years ago, the RNC, if they didn't open their tent, to more women, young people, to all manner of sexual affiliation, to minorities, brown, black, and so forth and so on, if they didn't open their tent, they were dead. They were dead. They were dead. Well, they're finding that out. That's why I said earlier they cheat and they do all sorts of things to try and win elections that aren't necessarily fair. And some of them aren't even legal. Take you back to 2004 in Ohio. Karl Rove had a reason for looking at that Fox commentator who declared the victory for the other side. And Karl looked at him and said, that can't be. You know, he had a reason because he knew he was cheating well in Ohio. Problem was the Democrats had figured out what he was doing and cheated back. But this is going to put the Republicans in the dark, I think, for a long time. So they better start detaching themselves. And Pence is one of those who needs to detach himself. I'm not sure he's capable of that, actually. And that's my biggest concern with regard to that scenario.
Thank you, Colonel Wilkerson. First of all, thank you for your service and for alerting us to the realistic prospects of significant, I guess, domestic conflict for which we all may have to contend before the January inauguration. For our final program segment, I'd like to invite our two speakers to engage each other in discussion for about 10, we'll see, 15 minutes. I'm going to stand back and let them know when to wrap up. And I'm going to send it over to you, gentlemen, starting with Dr. Frank.
Oh, I was hoping you'd start with me. I wanted to ask him, after all I said, what did he think?
All right, let's start with you.
Let's start with that.
Colonel Wilkerson, let's start with you.
After all I said, what do you think now?
I felt at first I was thinking halfway through this, I thought, oh my God, who's going to scare who more? I was thinking, oh my God, if I scared you, you scared me so much, especially with armed people in the streets and everything. It's pretty scary. So I felt very hopeful at the end of what you said, which is that there really is a possibility for a blowout. I actually think there is also. And I think that it reminds me of something that another person, my namesake, although we're not related, Jerome Frank, used to tell a story about how things can really change. And you don't really know that. But in the old days were really 4 years ago, a lot of people wouldn't admit they were voting for Trump. Yep. I think there's a lot of people now who may not want to admit they're voting for Biden because they're afraid of violence or afraid of some kind of reprisal, and they don't want to tell people. So I actually think the blowout is a real possibility, and I'm hoping. And so that part of your talk I thought was great. What I wanted to ask was, did you figure out other scenarios or ways you could deal with the other three possibilities? I mean, what kinds of approaches can be made if it's not a blowout, and how can, are there any strategies about dealing with it? That was one question I want to ask. But I also wanted to say something very, very positive and important to me. What you said about taking over in 2000 and that you didn't really get into the proper place until December of that year, and it was really very quick and without a lot of preparation. The fact of you're doing this year with all these other people and these groups of people about planning different scenarios, to me is wonderful. And it really is about planning and about thinking, and it's the best part of what our government can do, what the military can do, what other organizations can do. And Trump cannot plan. And he didn't have a transition at all. He had less of a transition than you guys had. There was none. There was no preparation. Zero. Not only did he not prepare, I mean, you may not have heard General Clark and some of those other people talking, or whoever they were, in 2000, but he doesn't hear anything and got rid of all the plans that were in place. And that idea of transition is part of his thought disorder. And you're saying something that's really important, which is that you are able to appreciate history and not do what he does, which is segmental thinking. Everything is, he's like a digital watch. There's no such thing as an arc. There's no analog thinking. There really isn't, because he attacks history. So he's actually a crippled man in terms of being able to think. So I'm worried about the people around him and what they can do. I don't think he can plan what to do that much except attack people.
I think you're right. One thing happened yesterday, I think, that illustrates your point in an administrative, bureaucratic sort of way that's nonetheless important. One of the people that he was keeping in this sort of recess status is in a very important position in one of the cabinets, was told to leave his office because he's 3 days beyond the authorized time. Well, that's going to start clicking, for a lot of these people, because they aren't confirmed. He never put them before the Senate. He never went through the process. He just put them in the 6-month window that you can do. And now apparently he's forgot you can, in some cases, you can renew it for another 6 months. He didn't do it. And so they're gone. I think what I would say is that the first thing, and remember, these are almost all lawyers. Almost everyone assembled around me has a law degree. But it's important. The rule of law is an important aspect of all of this. The first thing we're doing, and we've already started some of them, is law cases or legal cases to make sure that the law is being followed so far as we can, given the politics of a state being owned by Republicans literally. That's the first thing we're doing, to try and cut it off at the pass. And we're going to continue to do that all through the process. Every time there's something we think needs contesting in the courts, do it. Get it right there. The second thing we're doing is, as I indicated, and you can go to the website of Task Force and see it, we're trying to educate all these people out there, including the media, and not just the national media, but the local media. The media in Dallas, the media in Austin, the media in Peoria, and tell them, hey, things like, we've had 2 of these sessions with editors and others, and they've been very welcoming of our input. Fox was welcoming, especially their decision panel, very welcoming, because they're not interfered with, they say, by their editorial people or their ownership or anything else. They call it like they see it. They all wanted to listen. Don't call it on the night of the election if it isn't callable. You got all these new kinds of voting methods and everything. You got votes that are going to be coming in and so forth. And in some states, you got maybe 20 million votes by mail, and you can't count them until the night of the election. Come on, you got to take time to do that. So we're trying to educate the media, local and national. And we're trying to do the best we can to convince secretaries of state and other influential people. For example, in Texas, the most powerful person in Texas governmentally is the lieutenant governor, not the governor. It tells you something about George W. Bush, doesn't it? He's ceremonial mostly. Right. It's the lieutenant governor who's got all the power, and the legislature. So get to these people and tell them, educate them, train them, at least get them sensitized to the fact that you might have some problems, and you should deal with those problems legally and ethically and so forth and so on. It's not always going to work, but we hope it catches.
The other media I was going to ask them about is about local newspapers, not just television.
Yes, local newspapers.
Reporting have been fantastic.
Yes.
Wichita and different places.
Yeah. One of the states where you've got that is Virginia. You got some great little papers in Virginia. Yeah. And you get to the editorial board and you find receptivity to your message, and they want to know, what should we do? How should we do it?
And people,
what's new?
So one of the things that I wrote about in these different books I've done about the presidents is related to what you're doing. That's so important, it seems to me. And that is that I realized when Obama was elected, it became very clear when he talked about red states and blue states and all that stuff. We have become, and this is what's been so scary, an either or nation.
Yes.
With us or against us. You're a good guy or a bad guy. And I think Trump has exacerbated that and made it very frightening. And I think that what you're talking about with your group, and certainly with Biden, there are still people who believe in both and. That I may have some murderous parts of my personality or whatever they are, and putting them together and integrating them. And that's a hard thing to do nationally, but it does start with leadership. I agree with how you quoted Walter Lippmann.
Yeah, there's a French philosopher, I'm sure you'll recognize his name, Albert Camus.
Sure.
Reagan thought it was Camus.
Well, he thought of the wine probably, Camus.
Yeah. Camus wrote in French in the frontispiece of one of his books, I think it was The Rebel, Lone Revolte. We all have within us our crimes and our ravages, our places of exile. Yeah. Our task is not to unleash them on the world, Trump, but to fight them in ourselves and others.
Right.
That's very good advice.
I agree. And you can't fight them if you don't admit they're there.
Yes.
And the problem of the opposition to Trump, which I find sometimes in myself, is that we attribute all aggression and destructiveness to him.
Yeah.
And look at the part of us that also can feel destructive.
Yeah, I keep telling people, these people, whoever they are, have been with us since 1776 and before.
Yeah.
And, you know, whatever might be irritating them at the moment, there's an element of ignorance. There's an element of poor education. There's an element of really being wronged. We have the worst maldistribution of wealth in this country we've ever had since 1929. I mean, it's worse. If you read Thomas Piketty's books, you see the graphic detail of it being worse in Europe and in the United States.
Yes.
We have 400 families in this country that own the GDP of Brazil, all by themselves.
Yep. No,
Don't talk about the top 10%, talk about the 0.001%.
I wanted to say that when you're talking about Putin is playing with not a great deck of cards, he is playing by being the richest man in the world also. So he does have something.
Yeah. He has an iron grip on those oligarchs.
Yeah. But what I wanted to say also is that you were talking about, we were both talking about a little bit about with Camus and things, about unleashing hatred and what that's about. And Trump really did. And one of the things that we haven't touched exactly is the president unconsciously for all of us is a superego figure, is a conscience. And a superego figure will help us manage our passions and channel them and think about them and not just act on them. But when you have a superego figure that has essentially said, go ahead and do whatever you want, or I'm going to sleep and I'm just going to go play golf, we're in big trouble, because you need a president who can contain things and help hold things together. And it's not, I mean, it is up to us at this point. And I think there are a lot of people doing good work. I'm sorry I scared you, because but you scared me too, so we're even.
Yeah, we're even. Yeah. Well, you know, I have a good friend at Duke, and she said to me recently, if you want to see America, come to North Carolina. Your point.
Yeah.
Political scientists will say a democracy can't be a democracy if it's 50-50.
Yeah.
There's no chance of compromise, none whatsoever. So 50 won't listen to the other 50 and vice versa.
That's
And
right.
she said, in North Carolina right now, my home state, I've lived here all my life, she said, is horrible. Because it's exactly 50-50. She said, one vote could change everything in any county.
And the problem in this country is a separate thing that we never talk about, or I never talk about, is the concept of a loyal opposition.
Yes.
You win or lose, and that's it. And, you know, that's a problem too. And Trump has not seen any Democrats as being patriotic at all.
Colonel Wilkerson, I want to jump in here. I know that Dr. Frank asked you in his early question something about the worst case scenario. You haven't really addressed that. And Dr. Frank brought it up, and I've been thinking too. In all of your gaming, what was the worst case scenario, and what was the recommendation if worst case or close to worst case scenario occurred? What are the recommendations to deal with it?
I'm not sure that I was present at the game that I was told more or less dealt with that. It didn't deal with it in the actual game. It dealt with it in the hot wash up or the, you know, the quick review afterwards. I think the gist of that conversation was something like this. If the active duty military has to be called out under the Insurrection Act or other means that the president might use, then the active duty military is probably going to take action based on the circumstances that it assesses them at the time, will bring quick security to the streets, if you will, turn them over maybe to local law enforcement with the federalized National Guard, or maybe just the National Guard under the leadership of the governor of that state, with a warning to the governor, let this happen again, we'll come back and, you know, you'll be in real trouble. And let it go where it may from there, with the whole time they're doing that, the election being determined. And if the election is determined for the incumbent while all that is going on, then we have a totally different scenario for the next 4 years. I mean, that was the prediction or the assessment. If the scenario turns out that the other side wins, then we still got a problem, because you're going to have about 100 million Americans who really are unhappy. That's our estimate anyway. And so you just have to keep a lid on it for the first 4 years and hopefully do something in terms of leadership, policies, and so forth in those 4 years that convince enough of that crowd to maybe amend its views and come into your camp, or at least not be antagonistic to you. There were some other possibilities we examined too, which was secession, the country falling apart. Let me just give you an example. A few years ago, there was a book called The 9 Nations of North America, written by a very good political scientist who predicted that we would fall apart, that certain provinces in Canada would ally with the Pacific Northwest and the northern part of California. Same thing would happen in New England with certain provinces in Canada, eastern provinces, Nova Scotia and Ontario and so forth, and we'd fall apart. And, you know, people said the criticism of that book was, oh yeah, crazy, nuts and everything. Look at history. Just look at history.
Oh, yeah.
How many states since 1648 are really still where they were in 1648 or 1700 or whatever? It's not an impossibility. We could fall apart.
Yep. We
could fall apart.
Mm-hmm.
And that was one of the scenarios.
I think so too.
We did fall apart.
Okay. On that happy note, I think we need to wrap up, and I'm going to ask Colonel Wilkerson if you'd like to make a closing statement or set of remarks, and then Dr. Frank, why don't you wrap up your remarks after that?
I'd just like to say that I think we face 2 extraordinarily serious crises, even existential crises. The one is nuclear weapons, which we need to get a handle on quick, because you get the Russians talking about battlefield use of them. We got us talking about battlefield use of them. This hasn't happened since the 50s, when you had military leaders in both nuclear weapon states of consequence who thought they were battlefield weapons, who thought they could actually be used. All our theory over the last 60, 70 years has demonstrated that's impossible. That once you use them, you'll use them all, or as many as you can. And you'll destroy the human race and certainly set the planet back into a dark age, if not destroy it entirely. And then climate change promises to do that over a longer time period and with serious consequences already showing up in the global south. I recently did a conference with Bolivians and with Iraqis and Iranians. It's already hitting them. They're already seeing the water go away. They're already seeing the desertification. They're already seeing the salinization of their swamp lands, for example, in Basra in Iraq. Saddam Hussein tried to get rid of the marsh Arabs for years. He couldn't do it. They were too resilient. They're dying now because their reeds and their marshes are being salinized from the Persian Gulf. So it's happening in the global south already. It's going to happen everywhere. We need to deal with that. And the positive note on that is both of those crises require cooperation, global assistance, condominium, if you will. The world has to get together to do this and to do it effectively. Why not start? Why not get out of this, make America great again, and let's deal with climate change, and let's deal with nuclear weapons, and let's bring the world closer together rather than dividing it.
Wow. I want to follow on immediately, because I want to say that that is great and that it's make America part of the rest of the world again.
Yes.
And I think that what you're saying is, I was really just thinking politically that the goal of psychoanalysis, at least when I'm working with people, and the goal of most of us, is to integrate different factors in the personality so they can become more whole and able to live together within a person and consult each other and to think about various feelings and thoughts. And one of the things that people have been working on recently, some people, I don't want to sound like Trump when I say some people, but some people, is the concept of the Declaration of Interdependence, which is really different from the Declaration of Independence. They're not mutually exclusive, but you can be independent and interdependent. And we work on this in analysis and child development. We work on the capacity of a child to be alone in the presence of its mother, to have its own mind and yet keep its attachment. We work on that developmentally as human beings. And the issue is whether we can bring some of these things together, which involve listening as a new language, not just talking, and paying attention. And I think that the two horrible crises that you're talking about, that I agree with, those are the two, nuclear and climate change, require thinking. And that thinking can lead to action. And I just, I agree with you about being hopeful. Otherwise, we wouldn't be doing these kinds of meetings. We're both hopeful, but we're also a little scared.
Yeah.
That's my summary.
Well, thank you.
By the way, that's very Confucian.
Yeah.
So we got 1.4 billion Chinese who might agree with
That's true. There's a lot of people.
I want to thank both Dr. Frank and Colonel Wilkerson on behalf of all of us for your contributions and to ridding America of the dangerous demagogue in the White House and to helping preserve our democracy. In conclusion, the most consequential election of our lives is upon us. It is no exaggeration to assert that this election could determine whether or not we remain a democracy. We have monumentally challenging days ahead that may demand great courage of us all. After first working to get out the vote for Vice President Biden and Senator Harris, we must be prepared to take action with millions of our fellow Americans to fight any attempt by Trump to subvert the election. If we resist together, we will prevail. This completes our forum, and I thank you all for joining us. Thanking our speakers once again. Good night, everyone.